Today we need to talk about something that's very serious, hypothermia. We had a very scary experience the other day. My Tramily and I, we hiked across the Franconia Ridge in New Hampshire's White Mountains, and we did it on a day where there was inclement weather. It was probably around 40 degrees up along the ridge, and the weather conditions were wet. The rocks were all wet. The trail was hard to see more than, I don't know, maybe 30 feet in front of you, 20 feet in front of you, because it was so foggy, and it's buggy out here. It was raining, so it was this constant rain and wind. The wind was probably between 20 and 40 miles an hour, with sustained winds probably around 20, 30, and gusts up around 40. So it was not a good day to be up on an exposed ridge, but our group was prepared. We had appropriate clothing, and we hiked the ridge all the way to the Garfield shelter. So we started up Liberty Springs Trail. We hiked by Little Haystack, Mount Lincoln, Mount Lafayette, and went down the backside of Lafayette, where I broke my toe, and continued down and then back up to the summit of Garfield, and then down the other side of Garfield to the shelter. We had very minimal things that were dry, but we all have our dry clothes, our sleep clothes we call them. By the time we got to the shelter, we were completely drenched. We got out of our wet clothes, made ourselves a warm dinner, and then got into our sleep systems. So our air mattresses, our sleeping bags, and settled in for the evening around 7:30 or so. We were all laying there, and I thought I heard somebody walking around. I looked up, and in the shelter there was a guy standing there. He wasn't looking at us, he was looking out the shelter, and he just seemed kind of off. So I didn't really do anything, and cup of tea was next to me, and I laid back down, figuring that he was just sitting there waiting for something or somebody to, I don't know, maybe move over and make room for him. I had no idea. Seemed a little strange. So sat back up again a couple minutes later, and he was still just standing there. I looked over at Cup of Tea, she was looking at him, and we both shrugged our shoulders like, what's going on? So she spoke to him. She said, "Hi there." He really didn't say anything. And she asked a couple questions like, "What's up? You know, what are you doing? Are you trying to stay here tonight?" He just shrugged his shoulders. He really was not very responsive. And then we looked at each other and we're like, this is strange. The one thing that we began to notice was that he was drenched and his legs were shaking like this. Like he was uncontrollably shaking. So then we started to get a little concerned. We got up out of our sleep systems and started to address the situation. The more questions we asked, another woman who was in the shelter, who was backpacking, not through hiking, but backpacking the area, she got up and she's like, "I heard you guys talking. I'm a mom. What can I do?" And then we said, we need to get him some warm food. So she decided, she said, "You guys are through hiking. You save your propane, you save your food. I'm just backpacking. I have extra food. I'll go make food." So she put on her rain gear, went out and got her food out of the bear box and prepared food for him. In the meantime, the caretaker came and gave him a glass full of hot water. Cup of Tea and I were trying to convince him to take off some of his wet clothing. He still was not responsive. We got him to drink the hot water, and we were talking to the caretaker, and the caretaker had some other thoughts about calling for assistance or whatever. So he left to do some radio calls. In the meantime, Cup of Tea sprang into action she pulled her tent out of her bag, wrapped him in the tent, and then put her sleeping bag around the tent so he could start getting warm. We kept talking to him, trying to connect with him, asking him questions, and he started drinking the water. And over the next half hour or so, he started to become more responsive, and we were able to find out from him that he hiked up the ridge and got lost. And instead of doing Franconia Loop Trail, so up Falling Waters and across the ridge and then down Old Bridle, he ended up going over the backside of Lafayette, as we did, to get to, and he ended up at our shelter. He was clearly going into hypothermia. The next thing that happened was the caretaker came back, and I asked him if he had an extra sleeping bag or dry clothes. And the caretaker asked him what he wanted to do. So the guy said he wanted to stay, which was really the right thing to do because it was getting dark and there's no way he would have been able to get out alive because he was soaking wet. There was no trail that was going to get him to safety anytime before dark settled in. So we continued trying to keep him warm, convinced him finally to take off some of his wet clothes. He took off his wet clothes. We held the things up for him so he could do that behind the tent. So, I mean, the rest of us who are through hiking, we don't care. We take our clothes off and stuff, but convinced him that you're gonna have to get cold for a minute to actually get warm. So we were able to get him out of his wet clothes. The caretaker came back with some dry clothes, a t-shirt, and pants and socks. And then one of our Tramily members, Captain Chaos, gave him a balaclava and some gloves to keep him warm. Once he got into the dry clothes, we set up his sleeping bag and we were able to get him much warmer. He ate the food that woman prepared, and he started having a much lengthier conversation with us. We made room for him to sleep between myself and Cup of Tea. We put my tent down underneath the sleeping bag so that he would have a barrier between the cold coming up through the floor and the sleeping bag. He was asleep probably within 5 minutes. The reason I'm telling you this is because if you know people who hike or want to hike, some of these trails in New Hampshire's White Mountains are very easily accessible. And I think all too often people show up here very unprepared. He had nothing with him. He was wearing sneakers, cotton socks, nylon polyester joggers. He had, I think, a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, and sort of a raincoat. That's it. He didn't bring any food and water. He didn't bring anything to protect him. This is one of those things that you can buy cheap, on the cheap. It will save your life, and it's very lightweight. It's a bivvy. You pull this out. We didn't need to use one of these because we were able to deal with the situation with other things. You pull this out, you wrap someone in it, it'll save their life. If you or anyone you know is going to hike in the mountains, and I will be specific about the White Mountains, you have to bring things with you. You have to prepare. You have to have food and water at a minimum. You have to have a headlamp in case you're out after dark so that you can get back safely. You need to have a raincoat, gloves, a hat, something to protect you in case the weather turns, because the weather up here turns very quickly. I can't stress enough how important it is to go into the mountains prepared. There are multiple places you can get information about the forecast. You can look at the Mount Washington Weather Observatory Higher Summit forecast, in addition to mountainforecast.com. Plug in your peak and it'll give you some weather. Use those two as a minimum to try and identify what the conditions are going to be up high. That's the key. It could be sunny and beautiful down here, and once you get up top, it could be a whole different environment. please, if you're gonna hike in the White Mountains, or any mountains for that matter, do your due diligence. Bring the bare minimum. Look up the 10 essentials. You should bring the 10 essentials with you on any hike. Bring food, bring water, headlamp, map. Don't always rely on your technology to get you from one place to another, because sometimes your battery will die. Cold temperatures will make your battery on your phone die very quickly. In that case, you need to have a map. You need to know where you're going. You need to know how long it's going to take you. And you need to leave that plan with somebody at home so that they know when you're going to return, and they know if you're in trouble or not if they don't hear from you by that return time. There's a lot of things online. I'm not giving you a full comprehensive way to prepare here, but I'm trying to give you some of the bare minimum so that you can do what you need to do to prepare. That young man, he could have died. Very easily could have died that day. And thankfully there were enough people around to help him and save his life. So please, please, please do yourself, do your loved ones a favor. Prepare before you go into the mountains. Thank you.